Good evening, listeners. And today is part 2 of the trauma talk on what is your trauma message. Now, if you are to understand how your anxiety heightened and elevated in the past, one of the most significant things is understanding what is your most significant trauma. And once you can isolate what your most significant trauma is, you can understand what drives or triggers your anxiety, because then you understand what the root of your anxiety is, right? So when I ask you this question, what is your worst memory? I want you to look at, if you were to close your eyes and lie down somewhere and let your mind wander back and ask yourself that question, what is my worst memory? I want you to explore what comes up. And whatever comes up is hugely significant in what triggers your anxiety, because what that is you start unleashing what your trauma message is. And if I can give you some examples as to how you can actually isolate and discover your trauma message, I'm going to give very common examples of people's trauma messages, okay? Often a trauma message of rejection or abandonment is one where your worst memory is around somebody dying, usually a major attachment figure, so a parent or a partner or a child. And if that is the case, if one of your worst traumas has been lost, okay, then your trauma message is someone will leave you, or someone will reject you, or someone will abandon you. So whenever you're in situations where you fear that that might happen, you might find that panic attacks can kick in, or anxiety symptoms can start to flare, or you might find quite the contrast, that you're living your life excessively pleasing people in the hope that they won't abandon or leave you. So that is one example of a trauma message, okay? Another example of a trauma message is also linked to loss and abandonment, but it could be if there's a sudden unexpected loss or abandonment. So it's not the case of somebody who was sick or was busy dying and you knew it was happening, but it's when suddenly somebody had a car crash, as an example, and then they just died totally unexpectedly. So what that can instill your trauma message can be is you could be doing anything and something can happen. You can be doing the most mundane thing and something can happen. So as an example of that, you could be washing dishes, and as you're washing dishes you hear the news and it's bad news of something that happened that's terrible, and then what happens as a result of that is you can start developing OCD tendencies and start becoming very fixated around the things that you do and try to do them perfectly and obsessively, because your brain is saying, if you don't do this perfectly, if you don't do this wonderfully, something bad or unexpected could happen. And that is what we call an intrusive thought. It is not a true thought, it's a lie, but it's your brain's way of trying to protect you. So that is also what we can refer to as a trauma message, right? Another example of a trauma message can be if somebody, for example, was raped, okay? Let's assume in this case, we're just using gender specifics here to say a woman was raped by a man and she was raped by a man totally unexpectedly while walking to a car. Her trauma message is every time you're near your car, something really bad can happen to you. So her trauma message, she might be triggered every time she's near or alone in her car or alone in getting to her car. Once you understand that, you understand what is the root of what drives your anxiety. And the reason why you understand that is because what happens then is your brain links what happened to signals to try alert you. So because the first time it happened, you weren't prepared. So what your brain is trying to do is it's trying to send adrenaline into your body to fight or flight, get away from the situation, because it's saying, hey, this situation is unsafe, get away. This happened the last time. That is one area of your brain that is trying to send the adrenaline messages to you from your adrenal glands. But it takes another part of your brain to be able to talk to that part of the brain and reason with it, and to be able to say, you know what? Just because that happened at that time doesn't mean that that's going to happen now. That was a totally freaky experience that happened then, and that doesn't mean every time I'm at a car or near a car that this is going to happen. So you need two areas of the brain working together to calm the brain down. because the adrenal gland part of the brain, that part is like a child. It just operates to send you warning signals all the time. And it can be quite uncontrollable unless you have the insight and the awareness to actually start calming it down and almost start parenting that child part of the brain. Okay, so just in summary of today's session, part 2, what is your trauma message? Step 1, ask yourself, what is my trauma message? Okay, step 2 to that is lie down, close your eyes, and ask yourself, what is my worst memory? Step 3, once you have found your worst memory, isolate what is the theme that comes with that memory, that worst memory. And once you discover what that theme is, that's your trauma message right there. If you need any clarity about anything, or you're not quite sure, you had a trauma that you're very aware of what the trauma was, but you're not quite sure what that trauma message actually was, or what the theme is related to that, and you might not even be sure about how it plays out in everyday life, please feel free to add some comments, put some comments in the comment section, and we can look at that with you and just help you to better decipher your trauma message. And what that will do for you going forward is it will help you to almost be very aware and a little bit more prepared as to when you might have panic attacks or very heightened or elevated periods of anxiety. In part 3, we will continue this talk to understand the neurology around the brain and how it works with trauma messages. Okay, have a good evening. Bye.